Berlin was in a state of civil war. Hate exploded suddenly, without warning, out of nowhere, at street corners, in restaurants, cinemas, dance halls, swimming baths, at midnight, after breakfast, in the middle of the afternoon. And from 1929 to 1933, I lived almost continuously in Berlin, with only occasional visits to other parts of Germany and to England. Already, during that time, I had made up my mind that I would one day write about the people I'd met and the experiences I was having. So I kept a detailed diary, which, in due course, provided raw material for all my Berlin stories. So said Christopher Isherwood. Welcome to the Weimar Spectacle, where I explore the brief and extraordinary life of the Weimar Republic. I'm Bremner Fletcher Duffy, singer, actor, and theater maker. I've spent years performing songs in theater and cabaret from the Weimar period, and I am inspired, maybe more than a little obsessed, by that moment in time. And my big idea for these podcasts is that the Weimar Republic invented everything about the modern world, and we are all still dealing with the possibilities and problems it gave to us. And to prove this possibly completely unprovable idea, I'll be exploring the arts, the politics, the science, the architecture, the social innovations of the Weimar period, and of course, the terrible and irresistible rise of the Nazi Party. So if you are a fan, perhaps of Broadway musicals, and curious about why there are no die-hard communist, Marxist, revolutionary heroines on Broadway today, or if by chance you are a die-hard communist, Marxist revolutionary and curious why there are no good Broadway musicals today written just for you, well, this might be the podcast for you. Christopher William Bradshaw Isherwood was born in 1904 and was an Anglo-American writer. His best-known work is probably Goodbye to Berlin, a semi-autobiographical novel which eventually, after many adaptations, inspired the musical Cabaret. He traveled to Berlin in 1929, stayed until 1933, and in Goodbye to Berlin he included the novella Sally Bowles, in which he created his most famous character, based on a young Englishwoman, Jean Ross, with whom he briefly shared a flat. I Am a Camera is a 1951 Broadway play adapted from Goodbye to Berlin. The title is a quotation from the novel's first page. Quote, I am a camera with its shutter open, quite passive, recording, not thinking. Cabaret is an American stage musical based on I Am a Camera. Cabaret, the musical, is set in 1929 and 1930 Berlin during the twilight of the Jazz Age as the Nazis rise to power. It focuses on the nightlife of the seedy Kit Kat Club and revolves around American writer Clifford Bradshaw's relations with the English cabaret performer Sally Bowles. A subplot involves the doomed romance between German boarding house owner Fraulein Schneider and her elderly suitor Herr Schultz, a Jewish fruit vendor. Overseeing the action is the master of ceremonies at the Kit Kat Club, and the club is kind of a metaphor for the political developments in late Weimar Germany. The original Broadway stage production opened in November 20th, 1966 at the Broadhurst Theater in New York City and became a box office hit that ran for 1,166 performers. I have the pleasure of remembering my parents heading off to see Cabaret and being most upset when they wouldn't take me along as a tiny child. Probably that was for the best in retrospect. And then there's the film. Cabaret is the 1972 film directed and choreographed by Bob Fosse, based on the stage musical, with many adaptations. So, Cabaret the movie musical is based on Cabaret the stage musical, which is based on the 1951 play I Am a Camera, which is based on the 1939 novel Goodbye to Berlin, which is drawn from the Isherwood diaries from the period from 1929 to 1933. Okay, now that we've got that timeline down, let's move on to my interview with Brian Fairbanks. Brian is an extraordinary member of the artistic community down here in New Orleans. He is working on a new book about the history of the actual characters, the real life of the actual characters in Cabaret and from Berlin Stories. Brian started out as a film critic. He was Gawker's first investigative reporter. He has written for the New York Press, The Guardian. As an editor, he's been involved with books by Hunter S. Thompson, Jack Kerouac, Stephen Ambrose, and he's already written 2 extraordinary nonfiction books, which we'll talk about in the interview. We sat down in my dining room in New Orleans to chat about his research on this new book. Yeah, that's a microphone.
Damn, that's a serious microphone power.
It is a nice thing. That's what I've done the vocals for the last 2 albums on that.
Yeah, oh nice.
I got tired of spending huge amounts of money in studios to do vocals, so it's like, maybe if I get a nice mic, I can just spend days at home. But then the problem is that you then spend days at, like, instead of like having like a clock ticking in the studio where you're like, I've got to get this done in an hour, you have all day to do anything you want. And so vocals tend to get very detailed, but, yes. So I'm sitting here with Brian Fairbanks in my living room in New Orleans, and we're going to talk about the real, the imaginary Sally Bowles of Cabaret fame. Brian, do you want to introduce yourself? Tell me what you do and how you do it and why and when and where.
I have written 2 nonfiction books and a lot of unpublished fiction books.
Okay.
Yeah, those are all in a drawer somewhere waiting for me to have time between nonfiction books, which is just never going to happen.
So the nonfiction books pay the rent?
Yeah, the nonfictions pay the rent right now. Being a tour guide in New Orleans is the other, When I'm waiting to get paid, the check is in the mail kind of thing. I'm being a tour guide in the French Quarter or the Garden District of New Orleans.
Cool. Can you give us a favorite fact for your tours?
A favorite fact? There's so many good ones. The French Quarter is high ground in New Orleans. It is 5 feet above sea level, which is astonishing to think about that being high ground. But it's actually partly why it's endured for 307 years now. Nice. Is that,
It's the little mountain in the middle of New Orleans, the 5-foot tall mountain that is the
exactly
basis of the city.
The houses are, quote unquote, safe compared to the rest of our lovely city.
Yes, climate change will make things interesting down here.
Indeed.
And your last book got a lot of critical praise. I mean, I'm sure both of them did, but your last book, I've been following the media things, and that was the
Willie Whalen and the Boys, country music history, sort of. And I like to write books where I can parallel, two lines of history, essentially. So the sort of main focus, the ancient past, could be 50 years ago, could be 200 years ago, but parallel that with something that's happening today, probably political. It's usually something to do with the far right, just by coincidence.
Okay.
My first book was about how, David Duke's ascension led to Trump. And then my second book is the country music book about how, the 4 members of the Highwaymen collectively and individually led to what's happening in country music today, where there's like this country music that only country music fans listen to, and then the country music that everybody else can tolerate, essentially. The sort of alt country or indie artists that are not as obnoxiously twangy, I guess you would put it that way. Or
new
pop.
Country.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's just a little bit more rough and garage rocky than, that country music that's very much a pop music format right now.
Yeah, I read your first book. It's fantastic.
Oh, thank you.
Wizards, right?
I didn't know that. You read that.
Wizards, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Just this fantastic analysis of sort of how that whole thing coalesced. Yeah, it was great.
Thank you.
I have not read the latest one, but I look forward to it. So basically, you took how all that like quirky individual original country turned into this standardized pop rock kind of thing.
Yeah, and how these guys, by coming in and doing a different kind of country music in the 70s, essentially split country music into two camps, where you'd have the sort of outlaws, the Johnny Cash, Waylon Jenningses of the world, versus the pop people that the record companies wanted to kind of just keep plagiarizing and cannibalizing each other until people either got sick of it or it can just operate on its own. And that's kind of how it is today, where it's just this like ecosystem, or really just a system, very systematic corporate kind of music production there. But of course there's these people like the Jason Isbells of the world, that are operating, Sturgill Simpson has his own studios outside the system, and he basically broke his record company contract to make the music that he wanted to make, which is not straight country.
Cool.
And so, yeah, that's.
I look forward to this one as a fellow music geek. I do occasionally get sad about country music. So, so the latest book, you want to tell me how it? Because this is a Weimar podcast. So
yeah.
What's the tie-in? What's the hook?
So the tie-in is that we're going to do, my publisher, my editor, and I, we're working on it right now. Hopefully it'll be out in the next year or so, but I have a feeling that it's actually going to be 2026, unfortunately.
Okay.
But it is
podcasts are forever, so this will keep on
there you
spreading
go,
the
right?
word.
We can bring this back. Encore release. It is about the real life people behind the characters in Cabaret, the musical and movie, which is based on the Christopher Isherwood Berlin stories, and they are fascinating people. Some of them. The real life people are more interesting to me than the characters in that musical. And certainly the people that were left out of the adaptations are equally compelling, if not more compelling than the characters that they decided to turn into, Sally Bowles and so forth.
You said you like taking like the ancient past and updating it. What's the current? So is there a current reflection on the ancient past?
Well, they're all political in one way or another. They just happen to be, if you're living in Weimar, Germany, 1929 to 1933, as all of these people were. So a lot of them were socialists or even actual communist party members. One of them was a notorious communist who the FBI tried to tie Isherwood and other people to in later years during the McCarthy era.
Right, the House of American Activity. The House.
Yeah. And one of them, including the real Sally Bowles, became a Communist Party member, Comintern. Communist Party International member, was Joseph Stalin's press secretary in the West, in a sense, because she was the press secretary for that agency. And she wrote for the Daily Worker. She was the film critic for the Daily Worker.
So that really
Germany
goes against Sally Bowles' portrayal, especially in Cabaret, where she's kind of the least serious person in the world.
Yes.
So the real person is quite different.
Yeah, and you can imagine quite irked by the fact that she was only really known for being this person who was this, flighty, nympho,
sexy,
frivolous person. Yeah, sexy. It was all about her sex appeal and her love life and her, frivolity and just this goofiness. But Well, I mean, we could talk about that for
please.
sure, but the interesting contrast with today and yesterday is that we are living in this era where the far right is on the rise again in Germany, and on the right, it's rising in the U.S., of course, and what's going to happen with that? What's going to happen to our artists, our leftists, all the people that, like in Germany in the 20s and 30s, realized what was coming for Jewish people and tried to get them out. And I think a lot of people are going to start making some illegal maneuvers or sacrifices to their own personal freedom, like the characters in this book do, to sort of save our undocumented migrant workers and so forth. So by the time the book comes out, I think it's actually be more topical even than it is now while I'm writing it, which is kind of scary to think about.
Scary.
But at worst case scenario, it's relevant to our times, but maybe not like on the nose. Okay. Which is, it's starting to shape up to be on the nose.
We're on a big wooden table, so let's touch wood that it is sort of relevant. Right. Relevant-ish, instead of being terribly relevant.
Yeah.
So Sally Bowles is like best known as Liza Minnelli in Cabaret. Mm-hmm. But before that, there's the stage adaptation, which is also a success in its own right in New York. And before that, Isherwood, I got lost in how many versions.
I'll give you the quick version.
Okay, great.
The quick and easily digestible version. How's that? The original story, which was called Sally Bowles, came out in the 30s in a magazine, and then it was published as a standalone book, even though it's barely a novella. And then it was collected in Goodbye to Berlin, which also introduced several other characters, including the Landauers and the Nowaks. The Nowaks are not in any of the major adaptations. They are just kind of skipped over. But the Landauers are sort of in all of the adaptations in one permutation or another. Natalia, who was a real person named Giza, she is in sort of in the movie. She's in the movie. And then she is only alluded to in the stage play, which is kind of weird because you went from the book, Goodbye to Berlin, to the movie musical, skipping over her during the other adaptations. Sally Bowles is pretty much the only character who is consistent throughout. I mean, there's an Isherwood stand-in as a point of view character, the sort of narrator, but his name changes, his identity completely changes, where the only thing that's like connected to the original guy is that he's a writer in all these versions. The landlady is in all the plays. There's actually a play version, and there's a movie version of the play, and then there's a musical, and then there's a movie musical. So there's actually 4 major performed adaptations, shall we say, in addition to the books and the short stories and all that. So the landlady is a character in the books. She's a character in the original stage play and the original movie. And then she is a major character, including, I would say, maybe the main character in the Cabaret musical, and then is completely left out of the movie, other than a few cameo, one-liners where she's like, with the Reds do or something. Right. She's not really a character. She's really an extra, I would say, in the movie. I can't even remember the actress who plays her in the movie because it's just irrelevant, really.
I've seen so many versions of the stage version and the movie kind of morph in my head. Mm-hmm. So, because I've seen so many stage versions of Cabaret, and I've seen the movie a couple times, so I I kind of put all the characters in one big goulash of Isherwood stuff. So I'm having a hard time remembering who came and went. But you're right.
Yeah,
the landlady isn't really there in the movie.
Yeah, and it's kind of crazy because she's, a big character. Bebe Neuwirth is playing her on Broadway right now, and Lottie Lenya, won a Tony, I believe, for playing her in the original. So this is a major part in some of the adaptations, and then in the movie, she's not there at all.
Why do you think Sally Bowles is the crux of all the adaptations? Why do you think she stays and becomes like even bigger and bigger?
Well, there's a couple of reasons for it, I think. The main one is that the writers, the adapters, the screenwriters and the playwrights decided to hang everything on her. The character sort of broke out, I think, from the original play, deciding that, this is going to be the most interesting character. We're going to just do a traditional love story. And it was supposed to be Isherwood and Sally Bowles falling in love with each other, and that he was like straight and not interested in getting married. And then she comes in and throws the whole thing, Katharine Hepburn style, into chaos, and it has absolutely no bearing on the original stories whatsoever. In fact, they could have done it in any city. It has barely mentioned that Berlin is the setting, which I think pissed a lot of people off. There's a lot of bad reviews of the original play and movie that are like, why was this made? What did we get out of this? You took everything out of the original story that was interesting. This sort of, flighty, flaky, oblivious, apolitical person in Berlin as the whole world goes to hell, is a great contrast. It's a fascinating read to find out whether that character can sustain herself in the face of all these crises. And then the musical brings that back. They bring back Sally Bowles, the original version of the character. It's not about seducing Isherwood as much, and it's not about her entirely, like the first movie and first play were. And Cabaret, I think, succeeds, and there's a reason why they keep bringing back Cabaret instead of I Am a Camera, which is the original play and movie. And it's because there's a lot of possibilities for connecting it to today with Sally Bowles, because Sally Bowles is, I'm apolitical. I'm staying out of this. I'm staying in Berlin. I don't know what you people are talking about. Everything's fine. And, that works for an audience because you're just like rooting for them to leave together. You're rooting for them to survive what is coming. And it takes the characters much more seriously.
And there is a sense in the movie of that almost willful ignorance, but yet ignorance, because we're looking, we are looking back and being like, but at the time they're like, well, it doesn't look great, but who knows what's going to happen here? Totally. It could go the other way. We could, Hitler could move on. There were many moments when, it seemed like that was going to happen. And you can sort of understand their optimism to a certain extent. And when that kind of switches over to kind of willful collaboration as well is also an odd, that moment. Like how much are they collaborating and how much are we collaborating is an interesting kind of feeling in the movie and the show. Do you think, because Gene Ross is the writer, the serious communist, but did Isherwood see a woman who did he know about that aspect of her in Berlin, and he just took that out of he just used the parts that were sleeping around, having an abortion, having a great time in Berlin in the late 20s? Is that what he took, and or did he not know about that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think she was already she was a performer and not just a bad singer as she's portrayed in all these adaptations, except for the movie where it's like, why is Liza Minnelli here? She's too good. She would not be in Berlin, and not be unfamous. Let's put the unknown for even like 2 days. But she was probably too serious and too ambitious to be Sally Bowles. So Isherwood had to remove those aspects of her from the story because he wanted her to stay frivolous to contrast with, sort of the rise of the Nazis. There are also things like the Night of Broken Glass and the attacks on Jews and book burning and all that stuff is alluded to in the stories that make up the Berlin stories. But the Sally Bowles section is kind of this, like, I want to say it's an oasis from all that, but it's this kind of like, insulated world where she thinks that's not going to touch her. So it doesn't come up as much. I think you'd be hitting the reader over the head a little bit. But, the other thing in his defense is that the story was written in the early 30s. I mean, we knew that Hitler was bad and he had to leave Germany, but the final solution was not clear to anybody yet for another decade. So they were, all these people, all the characters were, even if they were politically aware, were not fully aware of what was going to happen to the Jews, for example. So having them say things like that dirty old Jew producer, which Sally Bowles says in the story, I think Isherwood thought it's okay to have her being anti-Semitic because it's not a big deal yet. Like it's not a, it's not going to be, it's offensive, sure. But the point is to show that she doesn't think the Jews are going to be exterminated, essentially. So you can present her that way.
Sure, we're looking at with hindsight and through that lens. My dad, who's in the 30s, he's in his teens, and he told me that everybody was like keen for Hitler. Everybody, he's growing up in Scotland, and he's everybody thought Hitler was going to be building highways and bringing back prosperity. Infrastructure and the border and
there you go.
Stuff
Sounds
like
familiar.
that was all very popular, and nobody had any inkling of, or if they were at a distance or they weren't too political, it just seemed like another strong man with a great ambition.
There you go.
And certainly the Weimar period was a catastrophe in a lot of ways. So to have somebody come in and say we're gonna make Germany great again.
Exactly.
Probably sounded really great.
Yep.
But moving on, yes.
Yeah, no.
But you're doing more than Sally Bowles. You're doing all the characters and examining. And your favorite currently is?
Oh, so many. But I mean, it's hard to pick a favorite because there are quite a few of them. There's two that sort of jump out besides Jean Ross from this book. And Jean Ross is obviously a fascinating person just up until the 40s with her communism and becoming Sally Bowles. But she also did many other interesting things with her life. But
what did she go on to do? Where did she end up?
She ends up becoming this sort of like go-to communist number 2 in Britain.
Wow. Post-war.
The most visible communist by being out in the street all the time selling the Daily Worker, by being the one who leads like the youth groups, even when she got older. So she was one of the most recognizable communists in the country.
And after post-war, the labor movement, explodes in Britain. Because it explodes in Britain without getting into the details of it. So do you think she actually has some influence in the kind of the left-wing movement, or is she so radicalized in the communist world that she's in her own world?
Well, I would say her influence does not stretch much beyond the Communist Party itself. I think she probably was too committed to the Stalinist party line.
Okay.
And then as people started to get disenchanted with Stalin, particularly when he first joined up with Hitler, and then when the show trials happened in the 50s, and then when he died, 40s and 50s, and then he died, and the truth came out, she stuck with the Stalinist party line.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh no! That's like Sartre in France, who was just never going to give up on.
Yes.
Doesn't matter how many tanks rolled over democratic movements.
Yep.
Stalin. Oh well. Once you pick your hero,
exactly.
And with again that current, there's no amount of information you can tell people often to get them to change their minds anymore or influence their decision making. So again, like a real reflection on our time where people just entrench their beliefs and won't adapt.
Indeed.
On the left and right.
So my favorites, though, if it's not Sally Bowles, which it probably isn't these days, now that I've basically written the first draft, is split between two complete opposite personalities. One is Gerald Hamilton, who was called the wickedest man alive during his lifetime.
Do tell.
Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley, his roommate in Berlin, which you'll hear about in the thing, who has been called the devil, the beast. 666 was his sort of code name in a lot of ways. I was at a tiny tangent.
I was at a performance at the house in the Marigny that was the sect, the little church house of Aleister Crowley's sect that had a little church here. And it's now a performance space so I was there and people were telling me that, this used to be Aleister Crowley's. I'm not sure he was even ever there, but it was kind of his devotees were cool. Alive and active in New Orleans for a while.
Wow. That's cool and surprising. And, they are, a wild bunch. But Gerald Hamilton was a con man who, nobody really knows what he did with his life because he lied about literally everything he did. He claimed that he helped Ireland before World War I and that he almost went to prison for it. Maybe he did. He also claimed that he saved Germany after World War I because he personally went to the Vatican and met with the Pope and begged him to use the Catholic Church to fund Save the Children, which is credited with stopping the famine at the beginning of Weimar Germany, essentially. And the Catholic Church credits him. So does that mean he convinced the Catholic Church that he had met with the Pope, or did he actually meet with the Pope? I don't know.
So the Brits are blockading the North Sea, so food can't get into Germany. But at the same time, I didn't know this. The Catholic Church is sending food to the children. Yeah,
Save the Children was like this fledgling organization, or so I believe, and that Hamilton was actually on Germany's side, even though he was British. He was on the Irish side, even though he was British. He was
a contrarian.
Side. Yeah, he was, and he'd been in prison because of Churchill during World War I, or so he claimed, for helping Ireland and helping Germany and trying to stop the war early on. And
these all sound like wonderful things. How is he? Yeah, how is he the most evil man ever?
We don't really know if any of these things were true. And then during World War II, he tried to stop England from getting involved because he was, again, on Germany's side. He wanted to stop communism and all this other stuff. And so he thought, the best way to do that is to throw in my lot with Germany. So he got thrown in prison again by Churchill. And then it started coming out all these things that he had done. A lot of them were like ripping old ladies off, bilking them of their jewelry and their money. And I don't want to spoil too much about the book, but there's a big sequence where Isherwood has hired Hamilton to help Isherwood's boyfriend get out of Germany and ends up getting arrested anyway. And it's debatable whether Hamilton did nothing and just took the money, or he took the money and actually set up the arrest with the Gestapo, just so that no one would be like, okay, we're out, and now you need to make good on your promise, like give him a passport and all this other stuff he was going to facilitate. None of it ever happened.
And does he appear in the for theatrical adaptation?
No, so he's
just in the book.
The most interesting thing about him is that the original musicals, like Isherwood and W.H. Auden, actually tried to adapt the story as a musical, and it never happened. And then there was a radio production that fell apart too. The BBC was trying to do, and Gerald Hamilton's character, Mr. Norris, should have been in that as well. It was going to be him and Sally Bowles, and there were the only two characters pretty much. But instead, he is the other novel that makes up the Berlin story. So there's Mr. Norris Changes Trains, which is about him, and Isherwood and the landlady is one of the other major characters in it. And then Isherwood and the landlady are major characters with Sally Bowles in the other Berlin stories that make up Goodbye to Berlin. Two novels, Goodbye to Berlin, Mr. Norris, make up the Berlin stories, essentially. So Mr. Norris isn't in Goodbye to Berlin, but I found that character so compelling that I could not cut him. You needed a foil. There's no enemy other than Hitler, who's not really in the Berlin stories, Sure. I needed an antagonist, and also to have him be kind of an anti-hero at the same time, because he does do some interesting things that I won't spoil again. And his later life is much more sympathetic, I guess, and
so he's like this book. High-minded, huge idea guy. The Ireland Germans save the children, stop the war, but he's also a penny ante, pilferer and traitor,
right? Who
then also goes on to have a post-war life, which maybe redeems him.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe. I mean, there are certain aspects of it that you start to feel some sympathy for him, some empathy toward him that he does not earn in the first half of the book, that he's just like pure villain.
This is really cool, because what you're doing is you're dragging, like you're dragging these characters out of Isherwood's and out of Cabaret and out of the stage musicals and back into their own lives. You're kind of reverse engineering the shows and the books to give us those live characters who walk the streets of Berlin in the early 1930s.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is.
That's super cool.
Thank you. Yeah, that's what my goal is to try to give them their agency back through this story. And if I get some of them to feel like real, more interesting, compelling characters, or at least equally to their adapted versions, then I feel like that's a success.
Right. Is it hard not to refictionalize them?
Yeah, because there's some interesting things about people like, say, Jean Ross, is that Sally Bowles is not her only fictional permutation. There is this book it's kind of lost to history. I had to go to the New York Public Library to read it. It was the only place I could find that had it on the planet, really. Unless I wanted to spend like $500 for a hardcover copy of it or something. But there's this quasi memoir by a guy named John Summerfield, written in the 70s, and he claimed that Jean Reynolds, as he calls her, had an affair with this guy, John Rackstraw. Both fictional names, but they're 100% based on Jean Ross and this poet named John Cornford, who was killed in the Spanish Civil War. And it's impossible. I can't ask John Summerfield, he's dead, did you actually know Gene Ross? Did Gene Ross actually have an affair with John Cornford, or did you make all of this up? What parts of this book are made up and which are not? Because you fictionalized them, you changed their names, they're both dead, so you didn't have to. And he has said it's like an autobiographical novel, and they're not the only characters in it. So are they the real people, or are they not? So we don't know.
Is she a version of Sally Bowles in this, or is she the dedicated writer, Stalinist, Communist Party worker who also has an incredible sex life and is like out front about it, all her, madness?
Well, I think it's the latter, because there's a really compelling sort of climactic scene where in the 60s, I want to say, he goes to meet with her, the narrator, the guy, John Summerfield, goes to meet with Jean Reynolds, and he talks about how this book that somebody else wrote about her destroyed her. And that everything that went wrong in her life is because she got pigeonholed by this book, which he calls something else, of course, but it's very clearly Goodbye to Berlin. And that section about him going to meet with her to talk to her about the past and get her to be on this like tribute to the poets that died in the Spanish Civil War. They just like depict her as a broken, like old, before she was actually old. Like she's I don't know, probably 50 or so at the time.
So disillusionment and alcohol have ruined her forever.
She smokes too much. She probably drank too much, and she just looks haggard and
okay. So that begs the question:
elderly.
Is that what happened to Jean Ross? Like, was
That's
her life
the question.
ruined in her British, because she's British, so and British communist, is all her ambitions destroyed by the fact that she was turned into this character? Or did she manage to sidestep it?
Coupling that sort of description of her that he puts in the book with other people that say, this is actually what I saw, it all sort of checks out that is what it was. And it really hurt her, because about the time she was going into like straight journalism, going to use her own name potentially, that was when Goodbye to Berlin came out. And apparently everybody recognized her. Her friends recognized her, like Communist Party, big wigs, if you want to call them that, knew that was her, this like floozy essentially. And I think she got sidetracked by a lot of personal stuff too at the time, a breakup and having a child and her parents and her sister getting sick. And then the Blitz, and that sort of all happened right about when she needed to get serious about journalism. And because of that, she basically just gave up all of it and focused on being a caretaker for a long time. And then obviously it was too late. But luckily she, for her, she came from money. So she got this sort of allowance that kept her alive for the rest of her life, but she wasn't really making any money. She was out selling the Daily Worker in the street, and I guess probably getting paid to do that. But, that's not going to feed a family. So.
Wow, that's intense. So this brilliant, like one take on it, it sounds like there's other options, but one take on it would be this brilliant, talented, smart, political, engaged woman is just consumed by this fictional version of herself. Oh my goodness. Wow, that's intense. Okay, I see why the book,
There's some silver linings. I don't want to depress people if people are thinking, I don't want to read this book now.
That's depressing. No, but it sounds like she's only one character in the book. But
exactly, yeah. And her story, while it could be kind of seen as depressing by people who are ambitious artists and don't want to have a family and would terrified of the idea of getting somebody pregnant, say, and like, that'd be the end of their career. Yes, I could see how that would freak people out, but there's a little bit of a postscript that shows that her life led to, her daughter become a best-selling mystery writer, a widely praised on both sides of the pond mystery writer, and her family has now branched out where I won't spoil too much again, but people like Olivia Wilde are technically related to her by marriage. So these people that have gone on to be creative forces in the world, kind of you can trace them all back to her and her family, essentially.
Well, that's cool. I mean, because generally terribly toxic and terribly damaged people don't send out a heritage of creativity.
True.
And healthy people into the world. So, okay, that's cool. So you said there were two people. The one was the most evil man in the world. Well, who's the other?
And the other one it's a much more serious story, but it's about Wilfred Israel, who is portrayed as being related to Natalia Landauer, who's the one who gets married in Cabaret the movie. But in real life, they were not related. His character was sort of lumped in with an unrelated person who he barely knew. And Wilfred Israel, though, is the owner of the department store that you see it very briefly in Cabaret. There's the book burning. There's some glass breaking. They paint, swastikas, I think, on it in the movie. I'm trying to remember exactly. He is not really a character. Like, he's even less of a character than the landlady is in the adaptations. But he is by far the hero of this whole saga because he started the Kindertransport, which saved 10,000 Jewish children by transporting them to London. Yeah. Wow. And he started it, with other people. He also is technically a founding father of Israel. And the thing about him is that he saw the Nazis coming well in advance because they were harassing him because he owned the most popular store in Berlin. He was Jewish, and he did not give an inch to Hitler. And so they would arrest him and beat him up. They harassed his employees. He fought back. He refused to put up swastikas in the store, so on and so forth. And eventually he fled the country for London, where he was actually born. So he had dual citizenship. So they couldn't mess with him. They couldn't kill him until the war actually broke out. Then they tried to kill him because, he was this rich Jew who was helping people escape Germany, and they were telling the true stories about the camps. He was buying people out of the camps with his money. And so they he was public enemy number one to Hitler. Well, again, I'm not going to tell you what happened to him, but
we will have to buy the book.
Yes, but there's a reason why he isn't, credited with these other guys whose name you would know, like, Gurion and the other founding fathers of Israel. But he is celebrated in Israel. He has a museum named after him there, where his art collection is. And there's like plaques and all this stuff. So he did all these heroic things and was very selfless. And the thing is, it's hard to do a sort of straight biography of him. Someone has done it. He destroyed a lot of his paperwork. He wanted to cover his tracks and things. But interestingly, somebody did do a biography of him, and no one would talk to her, even though it was 40 years after the war had ended, because he had told all his friends, don't tell anybody about what I'm doing, because he didn't want credit for it. But she did it anyway, and thank God she did, because now I can, I have material to pull from to write this book.
Wow, he sounds amazing.
Yeah, so he's fascinating, but also a sort of one-dimensional character in a lot of ways. And I've been trying to find other sides of him. But
it kind of explains why Isherwood's books are so, rich. Because I mean, you've got, again, it's one of my themes for this podcast is that Weimar Germany is this incredible hot pot of ideas and ambition and artistic goals and politics and violence and modernity in the sense. And so Isherwood's like grabbing all these people and I'm sure he fictionalizes them, smooths them out, and does various things with them. But the actual people themselves must have been riveting to be around, back then. And if you're dragging them out into the light, that's a great project. How about Isherwood himself? Is he in your book?
Yeah, so it's a tricky thing because Isherwood, of course, is by far the most documented person in this book. He wrote memoirs. He wrote the books themselves. He wrote a lot of letters. He left an archive of his letters. And, there's a lot of people who knew him. And one of the only people that I was able to interview for this book that actually knew any of these characters is his boyfriend of more than 30 years who, is still alive. So it's tricky because...
And you talked to him?
Yeah.
Oh, well, great.
Yeah, Don Baccardi. He's a well-known painter in L.A. He still lives in a house in Santa Monica that he and Isherwood moved into, I think, in the 50s.
In the 50s, yeah.
Yeah, so kind of crazy. But he...
Did you go to Santa Monica?
Not yet.
Okay.
Don Baccardi's...
Oh, I hope he's okay.
He's very old and,
right.
yeah.
I hope he's okay right now with the fires.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I'm thinking of at the moment, too. Well, the thing with using so much about Isherwood is that Isherwood is the central character in the original stories, of course. So if I'm trying to give these people back their agency, I need to take Isherwood out of it as much as possible and not put it through his lens, his literal camera, for I Am a Camera. And that is a difficult thing because since few of these people left their letters or did a lot of interviews about this time period and just their lives in general, there's not a lot of material that I can seize on and quote from or like use as narrative without it being through his eyes. And a lot of the book, especially in the beginning, is through his eyes. There's a lot of characters that we don't know much about beyond the fact that he knew them. But, the second half of the book, he doesn't see them as much. So everything that's in there is really, them reclaiming their agency in the narrative and in real life. So it's tricky, but yeah.
I love that idea
character.
of like these fictional characters crawling off the page and emerging to like strut their stuff in like almost like a in reality, as much as you can pull the reality into a book. But that's just so cool. Then you could go to read that and then go back and rewatch Cabaret, go back and read the Isherwood books would be adding a whole layer to the kind of mythology. Right. Super cool.
Yeah. It should be a great read if I can get it right.
Do you think, I'm going to ask a couple more questions and then we'll wrap it up. Did Isherwood capture, like, even though he obviously fictionalized these people, because when you create a work of like this, you cannot, you can't do justice. You have to, pare them down to the bare minimum to make a drama, and then you have to insert them into a drama, which maybe doesn't really exist. Do you think he captured some of their truths? And
Great
do you think
question.
the future adaptations captured some of their truths?
Yeah, I think at least a little bit of their truth for everybody. I don't think he changed them so much that they're not recognizable, that they don't have their humanity or something in them. Despite how offended people like Sally are by their portraits, I think, Sally is very charming, right, in the books and in the movies, of course. She was obviously upset about this portrait, and I would be too, it's only naturally to be upset by being turned into a joke, essentially. But yeah, they're all there to the point where
she's a joke, but you have such sympathy for her.
Right.
You know, she's never an object of ridicule.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, so you do have like you kind of
the original story is closer to ridicule than I think, say, Cabaret the movie is.
Right. Maybe I'm implanting my thoughts of that.
No, it's they tried to, when they made her the focus of the adaptations, they tried to give her a little more depth, I think, than there is in
and
the
Liza
story.
Minnelli has such energy in the movie.
How can you not love her even though she's like a nitwit? Yes. So, you know, she's a sympathetic character. So if Jean Ross had ever actually watched any of these adaptations, which she never did.
Oh, she just heard about them.
Yeah, she just refused. After she read the story, she's like, I don't want to go through that again.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yeah, there's a little bit of everybody in the characters to the point where he got permission from each of them because they would recognize themselves.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So that tells me enough
about
that he had to ask each of them. There's a funny, quick little caveat though. When one of them is still alive, Kisa, who's the bassist for Natalia, the character that Marissa Berenson plays in Cabaret the movie, she was still alive when a major Isherwood biographer was doing his research, and she sat down with him, apparently, and read the story about herself again. And as she went line by line, she said, "That's me. That's also me. No, that's not me. That is definitely not me." And like angrily yelling as she was going through. And it's because, as much as I would like to just do a story where it's just this person became exactly this person, a lot of these people are composites, or at least, say 80% this person, and then they took some biographical details from another person. So when she was saying that's not me, it's not me, she wasn't saying that he fictionalized her. She was saying that's my friend that he took this detail from, that her father owned a department store. That was her friend. She talked like this, or she talked like that. That's her friend talking. She can hear in the dialogue, which is actually from her voice, which is her friend.
That's very cool.
So,
I mean, in a way, the idea that you would be a person or live a life that is so inspiring that somebody would want to take that and use it as a basis for a fictional character that's an incredible compliment in its way. So,
Yeah.
Okay, one more question, or if you have anything else to say. So, just going back to an earlier point, and maybe you've already gone over it, but just to talk about it briefly, what's the relevance for our time kind of thing?
Well, the biggest thing that I have found is that right now, obviously, we don't know what Trump is going to do, or the far right movements around the world. But what's happening now in the country feels a lot like what's happening to these characters in the first half of this book. That some people are celebrating, some people are freaking out, some people, like Sally Bowles, are kind of in the middle. They're not ready to leave, and so they're maybe turning a blind eye to the fact that they're going to have to leave, or that it's dangerous, or that these horrible things are going on, and that they shouldn't support it with their money they're getting from overseas. And, I kind of feel personally like that right now, where it's like, do I move now, or do I wait to see if it gets worse, or do I hope for the best? Like, what do we do now? So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out over, say, the next year or so as Trump comes back in. Is it going to end up being like 1933, or more like 1931, or 1932, where there's like near misses of things? Or is it going to be like Munich, where you have this, like, all these characters are freaking out in real life? They were panicking because they thought the war was about to start. And then Munich happens and they're like, you guys are all celebrating that the war isn't going to happen, but some of us are still like in the back of our minds thinking it's going to happen anyway, just not right now. And I think that's kind of where we are. Or
the 1920s, when Hitler was essentially kind of a joke. Yeah. You know, he was this power. He was trying to do things. He was trying to, you know, he had the rebellion and the Munich putsch, you know, but at the same time, everyone was like, you know, he's a strong man. He's not very smart. Yeah. Nothing's going to happen. So there's that terrifying moment as well. And it also, in a way, I think, like, dragging these characters into the light, I don't know, it's just a really cool, like, you know, talking about the truth these days. We're all trying to find the truth, and to say, like, hey, we can look at the truth and then we can go back and look at the fiction, and we can, like, you know, compare the two and find some kind of balance in there. That's a really cool project as well. I never asked what the title of the book is going to be.
Well, it's a great question to close with, because then people will it'll stick in your minds. Here's an interesting plot twist. It originally was pitched as Life is a Cabaret, and then it was going to be, you know, subtitled something like, you know, The Real Sally Bowles and the Actual People Behind Cabaret, or something like that. About 3 weeks ago, I get a Google alert for the title, Life is a Cabaret, because a press release went out from my publisher saying that Liza Minnelli is going to put out a memoir in early 2026 called Life is a Cabaret. So I forwarded it to my editor, and I was like, did you know, A, that this is the title, and B, that she was putting out a book? Like, we need to,
your
like,
publisher?
Yeah. And he said, no, I heard about it today too. Wow. And so we immediately changed the title. I think it's going to be In Here, Life is Beautiful, which is what the MC says in the first scene.
Oh, I love that.
The musical in the movie.
I love that.
Yeah.
And In Here, Life is Beautiful.
Yeah, right? And it's perfect because obviously you think at the beginning, yeah, okay, it's beautiful in the cabaret, and then it's, you know, he becomes a Nazi at the end.
Yeah, it's also so filled with portent of, like, you know, in here life's beautiful, but we're not going to think about what's going on out there.
And it's like, in here, in the original adaptations and the original stories, whatever, their lives are beautiful and then all this stuff, and then of course it all goes to hell for each of these people in real life. So it's one of those things where we'll see what the title is. Okay. But I think that's the title. In Here, Life is Beautiful, the real people behind the characters in Cabaret, or something like that.
Great. And it's going to come out in probably spring 2026?
That's my guess, because if Liza's got a book coming out around the same time, I think the play, from a marketing perspective,
right, of course,
is to time them together.
Synergy.
We can go and do Good Morning America together or something.
Of course, yeah, you can hang.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be great. Okay, thanks so much, Brian. That was fascinating. Now I want to go and look them all up on Wikipedia, each one individually, and read their life stories.
I know.
Where can people find out about your works, your other two books? Is there a website? Is there Instagram?
I'm sure my brianfairbanks.com website is still functional.
brianfairbanks.com.
But, you know, if you really want to find out about me, just Google me or follow me on Blue Sky or Instagram or something. Okay. No more Twitter or Facebook for me.
I don't know what Blue Sky is. What's Blue Sky?
It's sort of the leftist alternative to Elon Musk's X.
Okay.
Whatever the hell it is now. Right.
So, Blue Sky, Brian Fairbanks.
Thank you.
2 books. One about the rise of David Duke in Louisiana and the machinations around that, and how, in a way, that set the stage for the rise of the alt-right in America and Trump. Am I
perfectly put? No.
Okay,
no,
great. And the second one is about the you can connect with this one because I haven't.
Well, the second one is the country music book.
Right, the country music, which we talked about.
Two eras of sort of alternative country.
Which has gotten like massively great reviews. I got like up in like some of the best books of the year last year.
Yeah, a couple of people said that.
That's cool.
No, nobody. It wasn't like the New York Times said it or anything.
The
New York Times hasn't even mentioned it.
What does the New York Times know? Come on, you know, those people.
The New York Times email that goes out about music said it was a page turner, but that has not appeared in print. So
that's really cool.
That was nice. Yeah, it is a page turner. This is the only reason I wrote it, is because I thought it would be interesting.
Right on. Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much, Brian.
Thank you.
That was great.
Thanks, Brian.
Okay, I'm going to try and turn off the recording devices without wiping everything. If the underlying theme of Brian's book, i.e. the inability of these characters to see the future and grasp the rise of totalitarianism happening around them, and then the artistic, political, social struggles to which many of them eventually devoted their lives after experiencing that totalitarianism seems familiar, well, that's the whole point of this podcast, trying to prove the unprovable idea that the Weimar Republic invented the modern world. Thank you for listening. Hit subscribe or follow if you want to know when the next episode appears. I don't have any advertising budget for this show, or really any budget at all, and I really have no idea how you advertise a podcast, but I'm sure it's possible if you spend money, but I'm not going to, because I'm just some obsessed singer repurposing an old microphone. So if you leave a review on your app or hit the star button, it encourages the podcast to be found by other listeners, or forward a link to a friend. That'd be all wonderful. And I hope you'll join me in the coming months as I explore more about the strange birth, life, and death of an experiment in creating a new society. I will put images from this episode onto my website, which is bremnersings.com, BREMNERSINGS.com. And who am I to discuss the Weimar Republic? Well, I am not. I am not a sociologist or a political scientist or an academic or a historian. I am an obsessive artist, a singer, a playwright, a cabaret performer who has been obsessed with the arts and music of the Weimar Republic all my life. I've recorded 3 albums dedicated to the music of this time, and particularly the music of Kurt Weill and Bertolt Brecht. If you want to listen to them, search for Bremner, Fletcher, Duffy in any music streaming site, and you'll find all my albums. And if you want to know more about my work, see the images from the period, or suggest a specific Weimar subject for an episode, please check out bremnersings.com, BREMNERSINGS.com. And join me next time for another walk through the amazing creative madness of 1920s Germany.